All right, so we just talked about Robert Whittaker versus Israel Adesanya. If you haven't seen that one, it should be linked already below. But this is Dan Hooker versus Iaquinta. I don't know why it took me so long to think of his name.
You were going to say something else.
This is Dan Hooker versus Iaquinta.
Dan Hooker versus Iaquinta, UFC 243, co-main event. I mean,
Pro.
It does not get any better than that. I mean, it's Dan Hooker. I feel like he's kind of under the radar too. A lot of people, I feel like a lot of people know of him, but whenever he fights, he doesn't really get a lot of attention that he's deserved.
Dude, he's a killer too with his striking. All of them out of City Kickboxing, they all have hands, and they're just elite when it comes to the kickboxing. But for some reason, Dan Hooker falls short here and there.
Yeah.
He has a winning record in the UFC,
Yep.
but he has a couple of just like setbacks. Barbosa was one. Who else did he lose to before that?
He lost to Barboza, Jason Knight,
That's not
and
bad.
Yair Rodriguez.
So all killers.
Yep. But he's got wins against. He's got a knockout against James Vick. He's beat
Who was
Gilbert.
looking unstoppable.
Yep, Gilbert Burns,
Who just won this weekend.
Jim Miller, Ross Pearson,
Legend
and
of the sport.
Mark
legend.
Diakese. I don't know how to say his
You know
last
who
name.
he is, the black dude with the red mohawk.
Exactly. But I think, it just sucks because I feel like he's probably a better fighter at this point in his career than Edson Barboza, but that loss against him was a punch to the body. And you just can't play Edson Barboza's game, or you're just playing with fire. I mean, that's the type of fighter he is. You have to do something different. And Dan Hooker's fight style is that stand-up, striking, like... So he was kind of probably baited into fighting how Edson Barboza wanted to, and he got beat. I mean, you can't really blame the guy for that. But this is a good fight because he's fighting an absolute dog in Iaquinta, real estate agent, a UFC fighter. It doesn't get much better than Iaquinta, and he's going to bring it.
Yeah.
And, the eye test with this, I would like to think Dan Hooker probably has the edge. He's taller. He's got a little bit longer reach. His striking is probably better. And we saw how Iaquinta really struggled with Donald Cerrone when he kept the distance and he picked his shots. But I feel like that fight against Donald Cerrone, Iaquinta really kind of had to realize, like, oh, shoot, did somebody just figure me out? Now, did Donald Cerrone just set the game plan for everybody else I'm going to fight moving forward? So he's kind of forced to change up his game plan. Because up to that point, he didn't really struggle with people like he did Donald Cerrone.
No, he was beating a lot of people, but I feel like he was fighting fighters that were coming into him, wrestlers who wanted to close that distance, and you can't do that with Al. He will tear you up. So, like, Donald Cerrone really stood back, like you said, and picked his shots and really picked them apart. Now, Dan Hooker's a striker, too, and he's an elite striker, so is Dan Hooker going to be able to play that same game and pick Iaquinta apart, or has Al learned from that last fight versus Cowboy, and is he going to fill in some of those holes?
Well, one would assume that Dan Hooker would take a page out of Cowboy's book and say, well, look how well he did. I mean, Donald Cerrone legitimately beat the hell out of Iaquinta. I mean, it wasn't even a fight. So Dan Hooker, if he, I would think he's going to do that. But, if Iaquinta rewatches that Donald Cerrone fight, his coaches are probably going to make a lot of adjustments to where he's going to see this is what we could have done, this is what we should have done. Maybe we should have, wrestled a little bit more. Maybe we should have put a little bit more pressure on. I don't know what their game plan is going to be, but he has to change something.
Close the distance a little more. Don't fight in that kickboxing range where you get teed off on. Like you said, maybe just try to stay in his face the whole time. It's more similar to like a Colby Covington or like a Kamaru Usman or those type of fighters that keep you on your back foot so you don't get time to pick your shot and pick your opponent apart. So, yeah, I feel like that's probably Iaquinta's game plan going in is keep the pressure on, keep him on his back foot, look for the takedowns. If you can't get the takedown, come in with some overhands, and keep Dan Hooker's back on the fence. But if Dan Hooker could keep his spacing and get his timing, I could see it being a long night for Iaquinta, kind of like Cowboy versus Al.
Well, and Iaquinta is tough as nails, man. I just looked up Iaquinta's fight against Cerrone, and I forgot I thought Cerrone knocked him out, but it was a decision. I mean, but that was 3 rounds of a
He was
beating
battered, yeah.
for by Donald Cerrone. I'm talking head kicks, leg kicks, body shot. I mean, he was battered. And for him not to go down, we've seen Donald Cerrone knock so many people out with those head kicks and just overwhelm them. And for him to take that punishment, I mean, he is tough. And that's one thing that Dan Hooker has to understand is you're not going to knock him out with one shot. And a lot of fighters get tired. We've seen that happen to Conor McGregor with Nate Diaz. He's like, dude, you're not going down. And then he got exhausted. So Dan Hooker has to understand it's volume. It's going to take many rounds, 1 or 2, if not 3 rounds to pile up the damage to get Al Iaquinta to quit. And Al Iaquinta doesn't quit. So
No, he doesn't. He's just full of rage and will come forward the whole time looking for that finish. And he has came back late in fights and found that finish. And that no quit personality, like you said, or that no quit heart in someone could find you a victory late in those fights. You
absolutely.
know?
And I mean,
this isn't a 5-rounder.
No, it's a 3-rounder. It's a co-main. It's not a title fight, so it's a 3-rounder.
Who do you think that favors?
You know, it's hard to say because I feel like
I'm going to say Al, because
that's what I was going to say.
He could kind of keep his foot on the pedal,
Yep.
You know what I mean?
He knows for 3 rounds he can wrestle him and, try to get the takedown. And don't forget, guys, what was it, a couple years ago, about a year and a half ago, he lost a decision to Khabib, who destroys everybody, on short notice. So, Al Iaquinta is capable of doing really good things. He just has to find his way to get out or get inside the range of Dan Hooker. And that's why he struggled with Cerrone, and that might be why Dan Hooker does very well in this fight. I mean, I know we're stressing that a lot, but I mean, he's never struggled with a fighter like he did Donald Cerrone. And Dan Hooker, if there's anybody, their height's around the same, their fight style's around the same. So
the only difference is Dan Hooker's younger and he's on the come up.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
So if anything, you would think Dan Hooker might do better because he's probably a little bit, like you said, younger and maybe a little bit more tenacious. I don't know.
Yeah, I had Al winning too going into that Cowboy fight, and I was kind of blown away when Cowboy was just like, both of us were kind of shocked when Cowboy was just teeing off on him and picking him apart, because Al was one of those guys who just was violent and brutal and vicious and came forward. He beat Kevin Lee twice. You know what I mean? He just came off of that very close loss to Khabib. Not very close, but no one had a fight like that versus Khabib, where they kind of challenged Khabib a little bit.
And he was stopping his takedowns late in the fight. I mean, he was doing great. So
I feel like if Al could incorporate his wrestling a little more in this, because we all know has great jiu-jitsu, great wrestling. He trains under Matt Serra. I mean, that should say it enough, I feel like maybe if he could get Dan Hooker down to the ground and take him to his world, he could wear out Dan Hooker's arms a little bit, gas him a little bit, grind him out, and get the victory. But if Dan Hooker could stop the takedowns, keep his distance from Al, don't let himself get backed up against the cage, I feel like this is Dan Hooker's fight. I'm going to go out on a limb here because I feel like this is an unpopular opinion, but for my pick, I think I'm going with Dan Hooker in this one. I mean, that gym over there at City Kickboxing in New Zealand, I mean, Volkanovski's fighting for a belt. Adesanya's fighting for a belt. I mean, next in line, maybe Dan Hooker.
Yeah.
He's fighting with the elite, so
yeah.
that talent of
one thing that we have not touched on yet is Al Iaquinta, as great as he is and as tough as he is, he's got very underrated hands, in my opinion. His boxing is very good. And I think a lot of people don't expect that. And I think that's going to be the biggest difference in this fight is Dan Hooker's going to know Al Iaquinta is going to have to make adjustments from the Cerrone fight. And he probably is going to think, 3-round fight. He's going to initiate the takedown. He's going to try to get me to the mat. But Al Iaquinta's no chump on the feet either. If he can figure a way to close the distance, I think it's going to be a rough night for Dan Hooker. So I'm going to, just to keep things competitive. I got a sneaky suspicion Al Iaquinta is going to get it done, just because I think he's going to be able to be very successful with his hands and incorporate the takedown. And I think that he's going to beat him. I don't think he's going to knock him out, but I think he's going to beat him with the decision.
And he's got a chip on his shoulders.
He does. He got beat pretty badly against Cerrone. I mean, it was bad. So for him to, lose the Khabib by decision, then beat Kevin Lee, and then come out and just get destroyed by Donald Cerrone, he's ready. And Dan Hooker's kind of an up-and-comer, if you will. People don't really know who he is. He's trying to make his name. It's a co-main event on one of the biggest cards ever in a what is it, a Superdome in Australia? Dude, it doesn't get any better than this. So I'm going to go with Iaquinta and with the decision.
Awesome. There you have it, guys. Let us know who you're picking in the comments below. Are you stoked for these fights? Because we're going to be watching them. We might even live stream them. Who knows? We've been thinking of
Feeling
a good...
kind of frisky.
Yeah, we're thinking of a good time to do our first live stream. We don't really know how it works, and we have word vomit, and we cuss, and we like to drink. So we're a little nervous about the rules of streaming. So we're going to go study up on that. And then, who knows? Maybe you have a live stream this weekend. If you're looking forward to that, hit that sub button. If you like this video, hit like. But we'll see you next weekend. This weekend, I don't know. We'll see you soon. Anyways, guys, peace.